Okay, welcome everyone to this seminar, which will be on the position of the European Union on Sweden's nuclear waste management. And as all of you know, or as maybe some of you do not know, the SKB, which is Svensk Kärnbränslehantering AB, is planning to build a repository for the final disposal of spent nuclear fuel close to the nuclear power plant of Forsmark, which is in the municipality of Östhammar, that is situated to the north of Stockholm. And the plan is that the waste from the Swedish nuclear power plants will be placed about 500 meters underground in the bedrock. And the spent fuel is going to be put inside copper canisters, which will then be placed in this underground tunnel system. And the remaining space will be filled with bentonite, which is a kind of clay. And this model, this kind of plan, has not yet received permission. I think an application has been submitted, but there has not yet been any decision. I'm not an expert in all these processes. And a repository for nuclear waste, especially for final disposal, that is something that requires a very long and complicated process. Because the nuclear waste that has been produced by the Swedish nuclear power plants during the last decades is a quite huge amount. So this underground tunnel system would have to be quite big. And also it's supposed to last for at least 100,000 years. Yes, and many groups and institutions have to be consulted in this process. And the last institution that has to have a say in this is the government. And today we have invited Dörte Fouquet, who is sitting here. And she's a German lawyer who, since the mid-80s, has been working in the field of energy law. And earlier she was an administrator, and since 1993 she is a lawyer working in Brussels but also in Hamburg. Dörte has a long working experience in environmental, energy and competition law, and her focus is on renewable energy, nuclear energy and energy system change. Did I get it approximately right?
Very nice.
Good. My name is Ingrid Ranke, and I'm from the association Värmland mot kärnkraft, that is Värmland against nuclear power. Värmland is a region of Sweden. And I will be moderator for this session, and now Dörte is going to give her presentation, and afterwards there will be a time for questions. But if any one of you has got a question while Dörte is speaking, you are welcome to raise a hand, and I will make sure that you can ask your question. And also, if you don't feel comfortable in asking questions in English, you can very well ask them in Swedish, and then we can try together to translate or explain. And I also have to say that this seminar is filmed, the camera is here, so it will be available on the internet. And if for some reason any one of you does not want to be filmed, then it is better for that person not to ask any question. Please, Dörte Fouquet.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, everybody, and very happy to be here on your wonderful island in during this exciting week. And I was asked to talk a bit from the outside view, so the European law, the international law, on how it stands with your repository project and the affiliated projects. And so that's my quest for today, and I hope I won't be too boring. And just interrupt me whenever you feel like. Why I'm here, maybe very briefly, I come from a German law firm, but I'm running the office of European and International Law in Brussels, and have my foot also in Hamburg. We are quite a substantial firm on energy law, and maybe to make a distinction right in the beginning, we work rather for the world of the communal and distributed power level. Even though we are the largest German energy law firm, we do not work for the big utilities, because that would be too much of a conflict of interest. Myself, it was nicely introduced, maybe very briefly. When I started to work in law and in energy law, it was the year of Chernobyl, exactly. And I had my first month in the energy and construction administration in my town, which is also a land in Hamburg, in Germany. And the thing was that we then, after Chernobyl or around Chernobyl, we had already set up one of the first ministries for environment and energy. And I had the pleasure then to work immediately on Hamburg's then plan to phase out of nuclear. So that was in the mid-80s. My first young, naive person was to change the statutes of our Hamburg power supply company, which was a public company at that time, Hamburg Elektrizitätswerke, and it was that we changed the statutes, and in Article 1, let's say, it was Hamburger Elektrizitätswerke wants to phase out of nuclear as soon as possible. Then liberalization came in energy, and then Hamburg sold the Hamburger Elektrizitätswerke to Vattenfall. And the first thing what Vattenfall did, and we have to say before, we were depending more than 80% of nuclear power. Hamburg was encircled of nuclear power plants, and in the way of dismantling it still is. So Vattenfall, the first thing they did, they took that out, so that they could continue the operation which they thought was very profitable for them, because all these power plants were in this so-called golden finish. So that was then a little bit of a setback for the town, but anyway, I continued in that way. I was sent to Brussels to the liaison with the European Commission, and since then I work since '93 as a lawyer on those issues. And today I thought I had to train myself first in order to be able to speak to you about the state of the art about the state of play in Sweden, and you are probably much more experts in many of the aspects. So if I get something wrong, just correct me. I want to give an overview on the EU primary and secondary legislation, and also on the international conventions which play or should play a role in your quest for a safe repository. And then I have some ideas of what could still be improved. So this is maybe a little bit of an overview on what regions we talk about, and why this is important, not only for Sweden but for the whole Baltic area, becomes quite obvious on this slide. So it has been said we have the two sites, and now we have the final repositories for Forsmark, and the other plans for the preparation, let's say, are in Oskarshamn. So this is like it looks like, and I wish I would be an engineer. In my next life I will become one, I'm sure. I work so often with engineers. I always find this strange pyramid here is where you wanna go, and where your country and where your responsible people think that they need to go for the final repository for the spent nuclear fuel. And so far, where are we now? In March 3 years ago, SKB applied for the construction at the Forsmark site and for the encapsulation facility in the district of Oskarshamn, and I apologize for my bad Swedish. And now it is under consideration for approval and filed to the responsible environmental court. The Swedish disposal concept is about special copper containers, and SKB hopes that construction can start as from 2015. And then they also think that the repository is expected to be commissioned around 2020, and then it would take 60 further years to close the repository if everything goes according to plan. So there were questions by the court already in November 2012 asking for completion. So they were not happy with all things. The answer by SKB appears to be a little bit hesitant, or not very detailed. And one of the main issues is really whether the copper canister and the clay buffer will really behave as modeled in the SKB safety analysis. And this seems to be there seems to be high relevant scientific criticism. I will come to that later, because I think there's one point, and that is the the water situation in the Baltics, which in my view is looked at upon not in a with holistic necessity. So where is the main player? So there's this old saying in law, where you have lost your right, you have to seek it. So naturally, Sweden is the main player on the turf. But one can ask the following questions: is the international European law adequately respected? Would a clear decision not violate those rules if it may become too prematurely? And does the outcome not require, the current state of art not require further consultations? You said, Ingrid, that there's a lot of nuclear fuel. So these are some numbers. What Europe is facing when it comes to Sweden, and that is not patents. And then I must really say, one has always give respect to. This is not working. No? Okay. So. Thank you. One must always be respectful to Sweden. You really already think about and plan at least for a long time. Maybe not with the adequate depth always, but it is a 40 years process where I read that some of the actors are really old pals, even if they are on different sides. So maybe the Stockholm syndrome may be also a certain thing to reflect upon here, but that's just a side remark. And then there was something which got quite an attention also in Brussels, that at one point in time it seems that SKB changed its strategy and was rather not so much focusing where is the best geology, but where are the most interested municipalities. And this is one of the quote of one of the studies, and I'll give you the quote later, I forgot to mention it, and I found that maybe a little bit difficult. So there were then these two critical local arenas which then were talked about and which went through this beauty contest, if I may say. This is an interesting exercise done in a research project on the European level called Argona, Arenas for Risk Governance, and that they say that it makes these SKB way forward makes it difficult for the audience to judge facts, values and reasons behind what is being shown. And consequently, the presentations of safety constitute an absence of transparency. So that means in plain words, maybe there's a little bit too much, as we say in German, sand into eyes and a bit too less of facts. At least this is what is criticized about. So when I come now on what do we rely in doing such a tremendous exercise of planning, there's naturally first the International Atomic Energy Agency as the major body for the management of this industry, let's say. And under this roof we have a joint convention on safety of spent fuel management, on safety of radioactive waste, which is always only quoted as being the joint convention. And that is focusing on enhancement of national measures and cooperation. And they have created something which is called the Global Threat Reduction Initiative. And that is a thing on itself which I will not touch upon too widely, but just saying it's about cooperation in research on handling and of spent fuel in the broadest sense. And it is applauded that there is a lot of exchange going on, and there are two receivers of such research waste, let's say, that is Russia and the United States. In the eyes of the current security crisis, I'm not sure if Russia is a good addressee for anything which comes from us in that respect. So then we have naturally the law, the Euratom Treaty. You know, the treaty is one of the founding treaties why we all work together, and it's still a standalone treaty, has still no phase-out deadline, but takes care of the uniform safety standard for health and workers and public. and has several tasks. Protection of health naturally is at the forefront. And I will not go into all details of the basic tasks, but the safety standards is the main quest. And that is transposed, if you want, in EU directives. Most of the directives, except one, which I will show you, are council decisions or council directives. That means they are designed in a way that, due to the specifics of the Euratom Treaty, the European Parliament is only heard, is not involved and is not co-deciding, which makes it a little bit of a democratic fossil, or an anti-non-democratic or pre-democratic fossil. So I have listed here just for you. You can take it home. I'm sure you get the plate that we have quite a substantial basis of legislations by now, be it on the simple safety standard protections, early information exchange, information in case of emergency, which was then updated, and then the control of high active sealed radioactive sources and orphan sources, including disused sources. And then we have a directive on radioactivity coming out alongside to extracting industry activities, but that excludes specifically the Euratom aspects. So we have the Council Directive, which installed the European Atomic Energy Community, naturally a system of supervision and control of transboundary shipment of radioactive waste. That is with an additional Commission recommendation, and a framework for nuclear safety installations from 2009, and that also touches already upon safe management of waste. The most relevant directive for nuclear waste and for the exercise of repositories is the Council Directive 2011. It's a fairly young directive, had to be transposed until 2013, and it sets the framework for member states' responsible management of spent fuels. And what is very important, it reaffirms the principle that the waste has to be treated and disposed where and safeguarded or whatever where it is produced or used. It also sets the ultimate responsibility per each member state in this context. And it included national policy frameworks which needs now to be drawn up or needed to be drawn up in order to fulfill the obligations of the directive. So the prime, and in each country, the prime responsibility eternally lies with the license holder for the safety of waste management under the supervision of its national competent authority. Further, the role and importance of the national regulatory authorities was strengthened, which is a case especially concerning Central and Eastern European countries, where we had some lack of such a, and the country I really like, apart from its energy policy, also France had to do some. So there are the basic elements. Again, the self and the health and safety standards are at the forefront. And then also that member states are obliged at least every 10 years to invite international peer reviews to peer their safety management programs. And the outcome will be reported to all other member states and the European Commission. And it has to be always updated according to the scientific progress. So this is the did I do something? This is the nuclear relevant, or the primary nuclear regulations, which are to be respected, which Sweden respects in its quest, but more importantly, in the question on the repository is also the environmental impact assessment procedure. That is also a procedure which is let's say organized on European level. We have the environmental impact assessment rules, and there is especially strategic. They are focusing especially on strategic environmental assessment. That means the assessment has to be done already in the planning and programming phase. And there can be no authorization of anything, nothing, before this phase is completed. and it has to have a consultation with public authorities responsible for environmental issues and with other member states if significant cross-border effects are likely. And so Sweden was, by the way, under radar of the Commission, not having transposed this directive correctly into Swedish law. And interestingly enough, that was done in around 2012, when you're and before. So it may be you may look into that again from your campaigning side or from your interested side and see if maybe, since Sweden at one point was not really transposing correctly the directive, when then decisions were taken at the time, if there shouldn't have been some repetition of exercise. But I can only give that to consideration because they are too far away from the Swedish concrete procedures. At least today, the Commission seems happy with the changes Sweden has then done. And it is especially interesting because Sweden was much more restricted to who could argue and who could put all forward consultation papers. So now I won't go into all the things. You can read it later in the presentation, but you have naturally a very good and detailed codification of these principles in your own environmental code, which I just listed here. There's especially section 5 and 6, and that and the 6 is quasi repeating that the country, and I come back to that, has to go to its neighbors in specific cases. And then there's one thing which is interesting, and that's chapter 4, and then in that chapter, especially chapter 17, that it's 4, sorry, that the municipalities have the power of veto over siting of new developments. But then, and that is even unconditional, except to particular specified cases, including the siting of facilities of nuclear waste. So even if it would come worse to the worst, even if the beauty contest had not found candidates, there may have been a false candidate, let's say. And then there is a big dispute in the government, or the government needed to clarify things. It's this veto valve in relation to Oskarshamn. The government came up with a specific decision that because the municipality had already written to the ministry and was criticizing this veto right, and wanted certainty that the community could not later go back out of the siting process when their voluntary had ended it already. So that was an interesting precautionary principle in a way of the community. So we have naturally in Sweden all the international principles, the polluter pays principles, the burden of proof principle. In this case, it's always on the operator. So you do not have to prove the opposite, which is an important thing. The best possible technology, that got me a little bit nervous, because I only know best available technology. So you have best possible technology, and it's not possible, too bad. It's the next best. So there I'm really essentially wondering, but maybe.
A question?
No, actually a comment. Johan Andersson from SKB in Sweden. My understanding is that our legal people say that the best translation of best available technology is bästa möjliga teknik, and then it depends on your interpretation of the Swedish. Möjliga could mean possible, but it can actually also mean available. So that's, I think, is the reason. So I shouldn't translate back from Swedish. I think that's the comment.
Yeah, but that is. But this is used by Sweden.
Okay, that's great. It's strange then.
Yeah. So, but that's a good clarification. So it means available.
Yeah, but then it's what available.
Yeah, that is another question, and there we can.
Anyway, very unclear actually.
Good. No, but thank you. So the polluter principle is clearly established, and I don't want to go into that details. So the appropriate location principle, again, this is from the Swedish Ministry of Environment. There is a report on alternative sites in an environmental impact statement, which provides supporting data for the choice of the site. The site chosen should be the one where the operations are most compatible with the code rules of consideration and special land management rules. So I think that is now up also in the overall final evaluation by the court and by the authorities. So where there is an effect that there could be substantial damage, this cannot be permitted unless special reason exists. This is also the stopping rule, which is necessary, especially in case of high risky procedures, such as finding the best way to necessarily find a good repository for the final storage. And there again, naturally, we have in the end the authority who can consider that an operation is justified for special reasons. And in our case, yeah, we certainly have to, all over the world who has nuclear waste material, we have to find safe things, and that finding is not excluding any risk, and I come to that. So that this is a rule that the authority then in the end has to decide after fair process is obvious. So the state again can only act a municipal decision if certain national interests are higher than the interest of the community, and so that leaves the possibility to the government again to finally decide on the location. Yeah, the environmental impact assessment is now underway. I have said that. These are again the legislative stepping points. And the Swedish Electricity Act, I only talk about it just in case to say it's not applicable. The prevailing is the environmental code, because the Electricity Act is more on regulation for power installations and the trade in electrical power. The land and water management in certain areas in Sweden, that I only give to you also while preparing. I wondered a little bit, because you have special areas, I would not say no-go zones, but to have out of cultural, natural beauty, heritage or other considerations are to be kept or to be treated very carefully. And Oskarshamn with this coastal area is one of them. That's explicitly in the law. I suppose that must have been part of the environmental impact assessment procedure to prove or to detail why, even though there is this special protection attention overall, why it is a good place for the repository. I just put that here in. My opinion as a lawyer is this should have been an extra chapter, but I'm sure it is, so we can also discuss that later. I come now to the further international obligations, and that is, we all know, and you said rightly, we're talking about burdens for more than hundreds and thousands of years. Something which is, I don't know, we can go back 3 or 4 generations maybe, we can go forward maybe in imagining, but after that it's difficult. So, and I really have to say also that it's a damn difficult task to do that, and I will not deny, and when you see the amount of documentation produced, you cannot say that people take it easy. Nonetheless, there may be some things which still need really further consideration. And there's one procedure which I think it's very helpful. I think actually it's helping Sweden, and it's helping SKB, and it's helping its neighbors, and that is the ESPOO Convention. It's one of the beauties, I think, in international law, and it's the Convention on Environmental Impact Assessment in the transboundary context. And there is a notification, and it all starts with a notification procedure. I come to that later in the sideline, but maybe you have seen that on the 3rd of June, Denmark has notified the start of an ESPOO environmental impact assessment procedure for an own repository for long-term storage of nuclear material, because nuclear waste is not only from power plants. But that just as a sideline. So Sweden has done that step already in December 2005. And then there were, the first step is always that they asked its neighbors who wants to participate in the procedure. And then there are several ways. So direct participation, let's say, a consultation, or an information only. And I found it interesting that Denmark, Estonia and Latvia only wish to be kept informed so far. So that thing is going on. And I just brought with me questions who came in that procedure. You can all download them. It's all on the ESPOO Secretariat site. For example, Germany, so MacPom is the German abbreviation for Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, asked questions associated with the transboundary environmental impact caused by emissions into air and water. And they asked, how strong is the through flow of water in the bedrock? What will be the resultant flow path of water into the Baltic? And that was the response. Water that precipitates as rain and snow only partially infiltrates into the rock. And we're talking here about 500 meter depths. The deeper part of the rock has a very slow groundwater flow also, and it's detailed by SKB. But then comes this one sentence: some of the flows paths will end up in the Baltic Sea. So this is just for you, for documentation, the reasoning, the starting of the notification letter of Sweden in the whole procedure. And then what comes with ESPOO, for example, is an international peer review. And this was done and the final report was published in March 2011. It were, I think, 10 independent reviewers. There was some trouble on some reviewers not being happy, but let's say 10 came to a verdict, let's say, and best practice of long-term disposal and safety and radiation protection. That was their quest. And the available, they said, they conclude that has presented its safety case for a repository clearly and in a well-structured manner, which generally allows the traceability and justification of its overall safety conclusions. The reviewers, IRT, has noted some areas where clarity and traceability of the safety case could be improved, and has provided recommendations. And that you can find, I have it with me in this report, several recommendations. I have here outlined some of them, and they had some observations in the area of best available technique and recommendations in the area of assuring continuing competence, knowledge management and stakeholder involvement. And they have some remaining issues. Again, they say SKB has done a good job, but recommends that clarifies the link between the safety analysis, the licensing, design, construction, commissioning processes, and further develops plans for comprehensive program of testing and monitoring. So, and they say, at one point they say, has done a good job. Naturally, one can always, when a peer review said it's a good job, one can ask, is a good job good enough? So, and then there's one thing on the, understand that the details of the process and decision leading up to the choice of copper for the disposal are described in a special document, which unfortunately is not available in English. But overall, enough robust information had been received. On the corrosion, they explain 3 hypotheses possible. That copper is stable under repository conditions, considering exclusion of oxygen. That it can corrode under those conditions by hydrogen evolution, and this has important consequences on the safety. That it can corrode by hydrogen evolution, it does not have important consequences. So they say then that the hypothesis 2 is the least probable at this stage. But the discussion of copper corrosion by hydrogen evolution is important and has to be resolved experimentally. The IIT strongly recommends to continue its best efforts to resolve it. And then very briefly, I know I'm already too long, but you can read it, the periglacial and glacial cycles. When you read there the peer review, and they must have read all the data and reports, it's just amazing. But it's also sometimes, in due respect, I feel like I'm in a science fiction movie. Makes it sometimes really a bit difficult, but it's an exercise which, if we think that is the way to go forward, it's an exercise which has to be done probably in the way SKB has done it, looking into in which climate zones we are now, that we are entering periglacial times again, and what that means to this part of the region of Sweden in the setting of the landscape, let's say, over the earth, on sea and under the earth. And so IRT finds all the, and we can only work on assumptions, logic. What do we know? What comes? So they say the assumptions are reasonable and consistent. The bioaccumulation in food and drinking water. The IIT reconsiders the appropriateness of assuming that the periglacial climate critical group engages in the same combinations of agricultural practices and hunting gathering assumed for the interglacial critical group. I put that here. You find pages on pages on all these things, and again, there is still apparently work to be done. Since there are, and apology for the typo, there are still critical technical questions. After the EIA in Sweden and after the peer review, after the ESPOO EIA, so I think neighboring states at this stage should ask for further consultation. And they should also ask it because many of them are on their own quest. I say it again, look in Germany. I work a lot with people in the Bundesamt für Strahlenschutz, and we work, and in Germany, I mean, what is happening there is, there are not even assumptions. They can already see worst technologies used in the ASSE, in the German repository so far. It's not a final one, but it's a mess. I invite you to visit it. It has an excellent center of information, and to go through that and to see how the ideology or the philosophy that the currents stay stable, where they have put the barrels, is proved wrong, and that it is dry rock. There's always water slippering. It's an interesting, and I really admire the people who work there to get some sort of order and some sort of inventory even. So I think again the recommendation would be to go in further, to take ESPOO seriously, and that the member states go and ask further consultation. Denmark should, I think, come in. I cannot understand why they didn't do it. Normally they shoot against everything, which is no, anyway. And I also think there is one convention, just for the latest slides, which has been evaluated or underused, and that is the Helsinki Convention. And the Helsinki Convention, HELCOM, is the governing body of the Convention of the Protection of the Marine Environment of the Baltic Sea area. So its main task is exactly that. It has 10 contracting parties, all Baltic Sea coastal states and the European Community. And it has its own environmental impact assessment requirement. But HELCOM so far was rarely involved in individual projects. And itself sees that it needs to improve cooperation within the convention, so ESPOO and HELCOM, and within the members, the states of the region. And there I found one interesting HELCOM view. That is the chair of the HELCOM expert group, and that is, and he says, Taya, is it a she? No? Anyway, this person says that there is a decreasing trend of concentration of radionuclides in the Baltic Sea after the steep rise caused by the Chernobyl accident. However, continuous monitoring of substances is still relevant due to many reasons, such as new nuclear facilities planned or under construction in several Baltic Sea states, decommissioning of old facilities, plans for storage and radioactive waste, and the fact that the Baltic is still one of the most polluted seas areas as regards radioactive contamination. So if that is the case has to be opened under the aspect of, if we now are setting up a chain of risks, this has to be grouped together, and there has to be, in my view, an evaluation. If not, the conventions run a little bit empty. And they even did not touch upon old submarine nuclear waste we do have from our Russian friends. So, in conclusion, we do have an international task ahead. I would never put my finger and blame SKB for the task, or Sweden. It has to be done. We have to live with the, in my view, wrong decisions we've done in the past. We continue to use radioactive material in very, very much smaller quantities, but in the health environment. So, but as long as the serious questions pertain, and there is no really mostly green light, consultation at least has to continue. I'm sure in the environmental impact assessment field, it's on its way in Sweden, so the Swedish side, I don't think, unless there is the government and the court who would reopen, that you would reopen consultation. One thing I was, well, maybe in the end also, which I found a little bit worrying, is the role also in the peer review, which is attributed to the communities, to be now the historian and the safeguarder of the knowledge for the future. I think that is not the role of the communities. It diminishes the responsibility of the KB, and I think I would take all that thing out. I would inform them, but they would be one of the receiver of information. They are not responsible, I think, for any of the waste considerations as such, only by the decision that they wanted to have it. So that's all. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much, Dörte, for this very interesting presentation. Is there anyone who has got a question?
Thank you very much. This international review going on is conducted by SSM.
Yeah.
Or who is under that?
In your case, it's conducted under the ESPOO Convention Secretariat.
So it's the Secretariat of the Convention?
No, the peer review is done by the OSCE body, the yes. OSCE, yeah.
OSCE?
Yeah, OSCE. No. NRA, yeah, you can.
I can clarify. So Johan Andersson from SKB Sweden again. We were discussing, we were a little uncertain if it was really done under the ESPOO Convention, but that aside, it was the Swedish Nuclear Safety Authority, SSM, who were actually through the government to ask the OECD, that's sort of the Organization for Economic Development that Sweden and many countries are members of, and they have a nuclear energy agency, the NEA, and they set up an international review team that came and reviewed us, is it now almost 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago.
It started even earlier, no?
Yeah.
It started even, I think, with the workshop from the OECD years before.
Yeah, actually it started now, if I remember now, because we submitted the application in 2011, so the first meeting we had was about this time 3 years ago.
So who is then responsible for taking action on the recommendations that you presented from this review? That is experimental evidence on canisters, corrosion, and who makes the judgments here?
Well, first of all, it's introduced by SSM, and it's introduced to Sweden, so your environmental court has that as one of the databases, apart from the national environmental impact assessment procedure now, and is still, I think they want to come to a decision this year, but it may be even later. I think it will be probably later. So that is the first docking station. And the second is that it is apart from the questioning of the member states, it is also part in the ESPOO domain. So I could imagine that countries like Germany or so, or as I said, Denmark, could go into further consultation. I said I would at least advise them to do so, because that's not excluded. ESPOO is not in the way that once you've given and then there is no, as long as there is no final decision, member states can always ask their co-partner to consult further. So that is that, and then we have the regular meetings or under the joint nuclear directive, which I can come back to. Do I do that now here to go up? Yeah. I said that in the beginning we have this under the Joint Convention on Safety of Spent Fuel Management on Safety of Radioactive Waste. They meet regularly, and they meet next time March next year. And there as well, there are normally subjects like how is the application of principal rules going on, like the new or fairly new nuclear waste directive from and safe disposal directive from Europe. So they talk there. So that would be also a platform where one of the members of the joint convention could ask that they go into further consideration.
Are there any more questions?
Did I understand you right that the European Parliament has no say in anything? They just have a right to be informed?
They have no decision power under Euratom. They have only the right to be heard, and then they can do, but also only since the latest constitutional changes, they can do so-called own initiative reports, which then would give their detailed view. But it is up to the Council of Member States to decide only. And then the Commission can do, on the basis of a Council decision, can do some Commission communications and guidelines and decisions. But let's say the line of decision power comes directly from the Council.
Any more questions?
I want to address this question of copper corrosion. A few months ago I got a report. I don't know, from that I concluded there was a so-called scientific reference group which should investigate this question of copper corrosion. And there was obviously this report came from the last one which was left in this group, because others had already left, and this guy, his name, I forgot his name, said that he leaves this now because he considers the role of scientists of a kind of, in German one would say Feigenblatt,
Fig-leaf.
Yeah. SKB anyway would do what they say, and this guy would say he cannot protect anything from scientific investigation for more than 10 years, 100 years. Now I myself was a physicist on my working time before I got pension in physical chemistry. And I would say, yes, that's exactly what I would guess, although I'm not a specialist in corrosion. So maybe there's anybody who can comment on that.
I think you're talking about the researchers from KTH.
Yes.
Kungliga Tekniska Högskolan. A name that comes to my mind is Christopher Legraf.
That is possible. I'm very bad in remembering.
Has anyone got anything to answer on that? Please.
Yeah.
I'm coming from Germany, so I'm only a guest to ask a question, but if all your recommendation and new research come to the result that it should not be produced there, what is planned now, what is the alternative? Yeah, the NGOs fighting nuclear energy, yeah, for some good reasons, and I follow many of these reasons, but at the end, and you mentioned that, we have to live with the decision that we have nuclear waste. What would be the alternative? Because I see the debate in Germany, which is much worse than here in Sweden, as I understood from your presentation. There is a debate now between several political parties, and I'm afraid we will not find a solution, because at the end there is the strong power of the NIMBYs. Yeah, nobody wants it close by. This is not an alternative. So should it not be an idea for the anti-nuclear groups to define a safe alternative instead of always coming up with critical requests regarding research and laws? Yeah? But at the end we have to deal with it. And that would be, I guess, also appreciated by the governments in every country and by companies like SKB when they have to stall it.
Yeah, well, I would love to be the one who could say I know what to do, but I agree with you that it's a joint burden. We cannot say, oh, I was always against nuclear, so I'm fine. No, it's ridiculous. So what in maybe coming to Germany, and I can leave. Together with the Öko Institute, I did a presentation recently in my firm on the German situation, and first of all, maybe from the content on the geologic here, I only hear that people say you have to go deeper, but okay, I'm a lawyer, yeah, I can only... How deep is deeper? How deep is deeper, genau, how good is good, you know. So I can also, I see that in Germany, I work for the Ministry of, now it's the Ministry of Economy and Energy, and we work in the field of nuclear, and I know that in Germany there is now a new move coming on the questioning, but then you can tell better. We have the castors, and as long as we don't really know better to use the castors more as in a safer way than to go in final repository too early. That is one of the things. Then in Germany we have the Endlagersuchgesetz, the final storage quest law. And I cannot fully say, it created now a sort of round table with all stakeholders. The problem was only some stakeholders didn't want to be in. Part of their arguments I could understand, but on the other hand, I accept what you say. It's who in French they say who steps out is wrong. So you have to be in.
You remain in.
Yes, exactly. So I think maybe even though we have already 40 years that SKB in the Swedish state is looking for going to a solution of final repository, and seeing that it will need 60 years before it's closed, I just wonder if there is still room for alternative thinking before we engage too fast finally. On the other hand, we have to move. So it's a vicious circle. I can only say that.
I just have a short remark, but isn't there some kind of legal need to at least present alternatives, even from the SKB, because I've heard there's been a lot of discussion about this.
That's up now to your court also to evaluate, and he has given, as I said in the presentation, he already asks further clarification, and at least it is said in your community in Sweden, in what I could read, that there is not a lot of happiness about the answers who came then, so I see that still as an ongoing process.
Was there a question here or a comment?
Comment, I think comment. Just a brief one on the discussion of what happening with the questions asked by the international review team and also on the copper corrosion. Of course, well, I will not comment the experts that first went in and then went out to the reference group, but ultimately, of course, it is the SSM and the environmental court that has to decide whether all the additional efforts we have made since we got the criticism by the IRT on our current on the level of knowledge on copper corrosion, if these efforts are good enough, or if the issues are still open. So I think that's the way it works. So I think from the Swedish legal, in the Swedish process, I think what the IRT has said, and of course all the other stakeholders that have submitted questions to the environmental court and all the experts at SSM has engaged in the reviewing process. That is actually what we have been working with, and of course our reviewers have been working with the 3 years, more than 3 years have now passed. So that was my comment actually.
Thank you. Did you want to ask something?
No, I didn't. I just had a comment on the miljögrupper in environmental groups, the role. Since nuclear power was introduced in Sweden at the time when the question of the waste was not the question. And now we have got this problem, and it's concerning a time of 100,000 years. I think we should try to spend a very, very long time to find the best solution, because it has to be solved, of course. And I don't think we should hurry up for a quick solution, because in these kind of cases it's always a question of money against the question of security of the people and also people's opinion. So the groups should work very hard to represent the people, the need of a secure future life. Thank you.
First.
Thank you. I'm Eric Setzman from SKD, and I have been and am working a lot with our consultations, environmental impact assessment, and also the alternative issues. And I would just like to clarify that in our applications, both according to the Environmental Code and according to the Nuclear Activities Act, there is a lot of information about alternatives to the Swedish KBS-3 method that we would like to use for the final repository. But it's correct that it's still an ongoing issue. All the reviewing organizations are not completely satisfied with the material about the alternatives, so we will present some more information. But it's not correct that there is no information about alternative. You could read about alternatives all the way from prolonged interim storage in our central interim storage in Oskarshamn, to deep boreholes, and to other methods of taking care of the waste, transmutation, and new technologies in the future.
Hello, my name is Michael Egan. I'm from the Radiation Safety Authority, Full Safety Mitigation. And I have a particular responsibility there for the review of the license review of this project. And I thought it would be useful just to intervene and confirm or comment on some of the comments. In relation to the peer review that was conducted, yes, that's an important part of the information that we have before us. We have asked, I think SKB will confirm, a large number of questions ourselves regarding supplementary material, relating to the kind of questions that were raised by the NEA, relating to questions we had ourselves, certainly relating not only to copper corrosion, but in relation to the degradation of copper in general, and that's more than just corrosion. Also on the question of alternatives, we were one of the bodies that wasn't satisfied completely with what was received initially, and we've been pressing for more information on that too. It's required not only by the Environmental Code, but by our own regulations, that the issues of best practicable means or best available technology is considered. So I just wanted to confirm what's been said, that we take all these inputs very seriously, and we're one of the reasons that the process has been going on so long, because we've been demanding more information.
I'm Thomas Johansson from Lund University. I started with nuclear physics, and I worked on the first application under the Stipulation Act, whether that had been fulfilled or not. And I, together with Peter Sten, made a review of the reviews. And there was an international review at the time as well. And now, quite some time later, when I come back to this, try to understand what is going on. The first observation I have is that nothing much has happened. The application now is very similar to the one we evaluated back in the 1970s. What is new, I think, is that the issue of copper has come onto the table, because that was not considered a credible chain of development, that copper wouldn't be there and uncorroded essentially in the environment where it would be deposited. So that is the main thing, and that I think brings additional question to what you also said. Are there alternatives, and what would they look like? And to me it seems that transportation is not an option, because it doesn't quite work and it's very expensive and difficult. Prolonged interim storage is just to say we don't do anything, we hope someone will have a good idea in the future. The third type of idea that I find interesting to look into is the deep boreholes that go below the water levels. Because that eliminates, in my mind, or potentially eliminates any path of transport from the depository to the biosphere. So I would like to know more about that, and I hope your questions include those kinds of options.
Indeed.
They do.
And that's the kind of material we are about to submit much more extensive material on the. I can take it. Yeah, so we can Yes, you understand. That is what Eric said. What we're about to submit to the Environmental Court and to SSM. I don't remember exactly when we will do that, but will be much more substantial information on the assessments we have made on these options and what the benefits could be and what the problems and challenges would be if you go for that kind of techniques. I will not say more about that, but that is exactly what we're going to submit now to the system.
And when is that coming?
This year. Do you remember, Eric? Because we have so many submission dates. I don't want to say something that is not correct. It could be by the end of the summer, or it could be later or earlier. So I don't dare to say. But we do have the documents. They are internally reviewed already. But we want to send these things in reasonable packages.
Any other question? Otherwise, I will ask a question myself that I've been thinking about for a while, and it's not a particular specific question about the Swedish process, but a more general one to Dörte that has to have to do with European law. And because you touched upon it and said that something like the producer of the nuclear waste also has to take care of it. But one principle of the European Union is the free mobility of goods and services. Is there a risk that one day Sweden has to accept nuclear waste from other countries? Because if Sweden builds a repository while other countries do not, maybe because they have too much public opposition in these countries, then the other countries may be very interested in sending their nuclear waste to Sweden, and they may also be ready to pay a lot for it. Is there I think there's some kind of law that prohibits that right now. You said there was some directive, but can this be changed in the future? Will Sweden come into a situation that we have to accept nuclear waste from other countries?
Sorry, in future I cannot exclude that. Also from the current legal situation, I can only say there's a directive which has the principle everybody does his homework where he produces his own mess. That's it. On the other hand, there are openings, and I think after some years ago, the then Commissioner Oettinger was a bit advocating this, and the Commission on the Free Trade Agreement when Finland went into final repository work, together with its application for the new power plant on TVO. There was the question that should become also maybe like a European center for repository. It has, in my view, been a little bit balanced back into that in this directive, which came later than the TVO thing. This principle is in, but you also have loopholes in, and certainly. If you have a convention between two member states to say, and if the repository facility in the one country would fulfill all the necessary regulations, I could not foresee that there wouldn't be a way to notify it at one point, but at the moment, no. Everybody has to do his own repository. That's why I was astonished about the Danish, or not astonished, but it sprang into my eye.
So if two countries agree with each other,
they have to fulfill the directive terms, and the directive says the principle is that.
But if you pay for it, if Germans pay
No.
they fulfill it.
They try to escape. They try to avoid this tourism, as they try to avoid it also under the general waste law. But when there is a question on is it waste, for example, or is it for do something with, then we are a complete different league again. Then we are again in the economic trade of goods league. So if it's for final getting rid of it, then I would say the homework has to be done at home still. And you have to be careful. But if somebody says, for example, I think you just referred to it, there is this, what's this name of this other project of in Lund? It was foreseen for Lund, a facility which would
the spallation source.
Yes, the spallation source. If such things pop up, then you could say, well, that is just to make something less dangerous with it. And by the way, if this spallation source thing goes on, that must be put now also on the table in view of Helsinki and ESPOO, because that is really something which would, again, be a possible risk for the Baltic Sea. But I don't open another story.
Then I have a follow-up question to the SKP. Maybe somebody knows it just came to my mind. Is it true that the radioactive waste from the nuclear power plants in Sweden is declared waste? Or is it maybe by someone declared resource?
Actually, I think maybe it's Michael that should answer the question. To my understanding, I mean, the waste that comes from the reactors, I mean, the filters and things like that is waste. Whereas the spent nuclear fuel, according to the actual nuclear activities, actually isn't waste until it has been placed in the repository, because it is because until that it's actually what do you call it? It's splittable materials. It's nuclear material until it comes to that point, and then by legal magic it becomes waste. But maybe Michael, who is more up to date with the nuclear activities, could say anything, or if that is okay, you don't need to say anything.
I have to apologise. I've lived in Sweden 18 months. I'm not an expert on every aspect of Swedish law. My understanding is, yes, that's precisely as you say, but at the moment, there's no route out, because also Swedish law prevents
Exploitation. Reprocessing.
Thank you.
I can give you the English.
It prevents reprocessing of fuels to be used again. So although it's not waste, there's nothing else to do with it right now. So it's a little bit of a legal complication.
Any other questions? Yes?
Thank you. In as much as it's only a legal question from fissile to waste, what is the safety measures to prevent terrorism or actions taken that waste to be used here or elsewhere? Sorry for the question.
The spent nuclear fuel or any fissile material that we're having is of course under safeguard provisions, ultimately under control of the IAEA. No, they don't have an army. But I mean that also means that Sweden, as any other countries under the Non-Proliferation Act, has to make sure that the fissile material will not come in the hands into anyone who shouldn't handle it. And certain there are provisions in all our nuclear facilities for what we call physical protection. You know, there has been actions now by Greenpeace and things like that. I mean, by the very nature of physical protection is that it's on an only need to know basis. So even if I happen to know, which I don't, the exact provisions I cannot tell you. But I mean, it's certainly something taken very seriously. And also the actions by Greenpeace and others that happened the last year, of course that was unacceptable, and we take now lots of provisions to enhance the security and safety at our different facilities. They were very far away from getting hands on the fissile material. So, but I mean, it's. I don't have the information to tell you more. So it's just I can just you can trust or not trust. We do, or the states are doing the very best to make sure it doesn't come in the wrong hands.
No, trust. I was not referring to Greenpeace actually, because what they are doing is demonstration. They are more pacifist than I am, and I am very pacifist. Yes. But I'm talking about the world is coming to a situation of such a tremendous uncertainty, and not only uncertainty, in somehow we are replicating 100 years later these sparkles of antagonistic confrontation. And 100 years ago, the nuclear fissile material were not there. Now we have it as an extra ingredient in addition to all the other sparkling elements. Then it's like, I don't know if I prefer to be in these conditions or on the top of a volcano in Sicilia. Both are equally lethal, and that is the point.
Just a quick comment on that. I think to me personally it's one of the main reasons why I think we need to do something about it now and not wait too long, to be honest. That's my personal opinion. That is sort of what makes me happy to go to work every morning.
I would just like to add, to agree with Johan, that establishing the final repository is the best way to safeguard the nuclear material, because basic conditions and basic requirements on the final repository are that it should not need control or surveillance.
That means the selection of the place for the final repository is still the controversial aspect. I put my hands out.
I want to get the word. Dörte.
Yes, my name is Dörte Fouquet. I'm active in the border of anti-nuclear power movement in Sweden. I have my eldest grandchild, David, will be 12 years next year. And in 85 years from next year, we will write 2100. And then he will be a grandfather to a child who will be grown up, be a grown-up person in 2100. It's only 85 years to that time. Well, my question is, should we put these problems further to new generations, and they have to try to solve them, or should we realize that we should solve it and put it somewhere, and not to give these problems to coming generations, to my grandchildren's grandchildren.
Well, I think the question whether the nuclear waste should be put in a place as safe as possible, as soon as possible, or whether it should be kept and in the hope to find a solution later or a better solution or something. I think this discussion can go on forever. So, is there any other more direct question maybe that has got to do with the European law or something, because we have an expert here who is not here every day.
I got one.
But first behind you.
Okay. No problem. No problem. Ladies first. He wanted to meet my husband. Me burn first. We were talking about the finite product. However, when it becomes commodity, if my recollection is correct, a few years ago, there were transportation by train, blinded train, special trains, blah, 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 from taken waste from France to be treated in Germany. And all over. And in addition to all the social uproar that created, which is not the point of this discussion, my request is, what are the legal instruments protecting both cases and the population that is within the transportation path?
But when the government, the government under Social Democratic and Green coalition in Germany came into power, they declared to take back the waste from which was sent to France and which was sent to wherever, back to Germany, which was done, and which is done. Each transport is done in a frightfully expensive way, and as I said, the special containments, which are the so-called castor transports. Each transport is a frightful agony still now in Germany. When things move to interim storage, for example, you do have the whole social movement next to the trains, and it's a difficult thing in all countries. In France, it's quite rough for those who go on the train. There was death last year or 2 years ago again from young campaigners. So that remains with us as much as the question of finding a repository for quite some time. Because we do not have the final repository, and even if we have it, you have it also here. You need first to put the stuff in the containers at the other place, and that is also an extensive part of the environmental impact assessment. Then ship it to the final, then it has to go down, then at one point only it will be closed. So yes, it's a societal thing where I am always reminded of a ballad from Goethe. In German it's called der Zauberlehrling. Where the apprentice to a sorcerer says, "Oh, the boss is not there. I can do it as well." And then he calls the broom to bring water by buckets. But then he forgot. He didn't know how to say stop. So, and then we are a little bit in that, but we don't have, at the end of Goethe's ballad, the sorcerer came back and had the keyword. So, and we don't.
There is another set of issues, I think, that might be dealt with in the international conventions, and that has to do with how this is paid for. In Sweden, money is being set aside on a kilowatt-hour produced basis, and many claim that it's totally inadequate amounts of money. Now, are there any rules in the international community or the European community on how you deal with these long-term time frames that are involved and sort of intergenerational responsibility for paying and so forth?
So that's a very good question, which is as much relevant for repository requests as much as for dismantling. And some years ago, and it is still online, I was part of a big study, Directive for the European Commission, on just checking what the provisions are in the various member states. And it goes from zero money and responsibility for, I talk now more about dismantling, but I would say the same would apply to repository, up to some money. And if I just compare my own country, Germany, in the dismantling, they had also they had put reserved money back in order to be able to dismantle and have the costs then there. Now the process started, and now our utilities, who are also nuclear power providers, they are asking now basically for a bad bank, where they would put in to their money, which is hopefully still there, because we weren't so fortunate that you have a dedicated fund mechanism. We had it on the books of the companies, and they could go shopping, or not. So what is there will be put into that, but the thing is that Vattenfall, E.ON, NBW already said that it may not be enough, and then they want that it is societal obligation. So to make a long thing short, so far it's national thing. We do have guidelines from the Commission, but we don't have, let's say, a European agency for the financing and repartition of responsibilities. We only have the main responsibility, again, in the European Directive, that it's the producer who normally has to pay.
So the last question, because we have to finish soon, but please.
Yeah. I have one question, because you mentioned the security that it can be undone on the ground, on the top. So is there any regulation saying that these storage fields have to be closed after that, so you cannot open it in the future if you have new technology to reduce the waste? So is there an obligation to close them forever by law?
Not. Also now I need the help from SKB. Not to. In European law, you just they distinguish between disposal and repository. So the repository is meant it stays there and it won't be reopened. But how you design, or maybe we ask better the administration, how you design the authorization, what is there if you could have recoverable solutions, is, I think, then up to the planning and permitting process of the respective member state. And as I said, I think in Germany now, they think about still, at least for some time, of recoverable solutions.
That's more or less my understanding of how the European Directive works.
Yes.
There's no requirement in Swedish law that it should be recoverable. We say in our regulations that if it is designed to be recoverable, then that should not have a detrimental impact on the safety. But it's an open question as far as the Swedish legal position is concerned. My understanding is there's a new French law, because there's been developments there, that specifically requires recoverability as part of the design of the repository. So there is a variation and a variety in different countries in Europe, all working to the same directive.
This is a geostrategic.
I may use it. No, I'm kidding. It was just a joke.
And unfortunately, I think we have to finish, but if you want to continue talking, you can continue talking to the neighbors, and I think Dörte will also be here for a little while if you want to continue asking questions. I thank you so much, Dörte Fouquet, for coming.
It's my pleasure.
And we have a little Atomkraftvertrag bag and one of our brochures that is in different languages.
Good. Thank you, I got the message.
So we are very happy that you were here, and I'm happy that you also came, and thank you for the nice discussion, and thank you, Dörte.
Thank you for having me.